Good morning.
Good morning.
Have you ever met a person that thinks they're an expert on everything? Regardless of the topic, they know more than you. It reminds me of my third grade teacher, Mrs. Cook. I won't tell you some of the things she wrote on my report card, but I remember the time when I went into school and she made me take a test, stay in at recess and take a test. Normally you took it during class, but she was punishing me. I said, Mrs. Cook, I could not get to school yesterday. The bus never came. And she said, yes, I'm well aware of that fact, but I also know that Mr. Spohr offered to give everyone a ride from your bus stop, and you didn't take it. Therefore, since the other kids made it to school and you didn't, you will take the test during recess. Well, what she said was true. The bus never showed, or Mr. Spohr offered a ride. What she didn't know was Mr. Spohr lived across the street from my house. Mr. Spohr was in many, many accidents. And my parents said, do not ever ride in the car with Mr. Spohr. What do you expect from a guy that stood 6'7" and drove a little compact car down the road like this? Mrs. Cook did not understand that. But the thing I remember the most was the time when she argued with me about my name. She said, your real name is Richard. No, my real name is Ricky. No, that is your nickname, but your given name, your birth name is Richard. No, it is Ricky. So we argued back and forth a little bit. Finally, she said, do you have any siblings? I don't know what a sibling. I'm in third grade. What's a sibling? Finally, when she explained what it meant, I said, yes, I have two brothers. And what are their names? Billy and Randy. She said, no, it is William and Randall, and your name is Richard. No, it is Billy, Randy, and Ricky. And so we went back and forth, and finally, she wrote a note for me to take home to my mom so my mom could explain to me the proper names of the members of my family. Took it to Mom. She wrote back. I took it to Mrs. Cook, and it said, dear Mrs. Cook, the name of our children are Billy, Randy, and Ricky. Thank you very much. By the way, unlike my parents, Debbie and I are not hillbillies. Our son's name is not Ricky. It's not Richard either. It is Rick. Rick Allen Yarbrough II, which means technically there is no first because we have different names. And people said, you can't do that. That's not proper. Watch us. It's our son. We can do anything we want to protect him against people like Mrs. Cook. We are in the second week of a series, Searching Behind the Stone. Last week, we searched behind the garden. We looked at Jesus praying. And we learned two very important truths. Number one, life is like a roller coaster with its highs and lows and ups and downs and twists and turns. And we experience this emotional roller coaster as did Jesus. In fact, we discovered that even God, when placed in this body, experienced confusion and doubt at times. If it happened to Jesus, we shouldn't be surprised when it happens to us. It's part of life. But we also discovered the power behind Jesus' prayer in the garden when he prayed, Father, not my will, but your will be done. And the power behind the prayer was Jesus knew the will of God, and he committed to doing the will of God long before he ever entered the garden. And that's why, even though he did not want to go forward with the plan, he was able to do so because he already knew God's will. All of us have stones in our lives. Those stones may be fears, doubts, insecurities, habits, maybe just situations before it. But we have stones, and sometimes they are boulders that we know need to get out of the way. We need to get through them, and God knows that as well. But the only way to get through them is to know the will of God and commit to doing the will of God long before it becomes a crisis. But here's what we discover. Once we turn it over to God and do it His way and in His time, and the boulder is removed, much like that roller coaster, that very thing that was causing us fear can become a source of great joy in our lives. We just have to be willing to move forward and trust God and do it His way. This morning we are going to look behind the arrest of Jesus. And as we do, we discover a man who, much like Mrs. Cook, could not see beyond his own little perspective. because of greed, because of his closed mind and closed heart and his selfish desires. He could not see the truth. His eyes were distorted, and it led to probably the biggest act of betrayal in human history. And I ask myself, how could that happen? How could Judas do that to Jesus? A man who had witnessed the miracles, who had heard the teachings, who had seen the compassion firsthand. How could he betray him? And I ask myself, if that could be true of Judas, what about us, his followers today? Could we be guilty of betraying Jesus as well? Are we making Judas the scapegoat for the arrest when we've probably done the same thing? Do we share blame in that? This morning we're going to look behind the arrest, because what led Judas astray could lead us astray as well. But in order to look behind the arrest, we must understand Judas and what he did.